Welcome, everyone. We have another edition of Top 5 of the Week, hot off the press and curated especially for you. For this week, our recommended publications look at financing for sustainable development, gender and agri-food systems in Africa, the economic and distributional effects of the AfCFTA, corruption risk mapping in Kenya, and home-based work and homework in Ghana. Let's dive in, shall we? First up, we recommend a working paper published by the International Labour Organization on home-based work and homework in Ghana. The paper, which is only 43 pages, opens up with an overview of work and employment in Ghana, including formal and informal employment. The paper then goes on to explore the nature and character of homework and home-based work, drawing on interviews with 124 individuals working in agro-processing, arts and crafts, industry, and the services sector. The paper concludes that policy changes are needed in a number of areas, and these changes should include the redesign of labor surveys, and it should also address the limitations of Ghana's Labour Act to adequately capture the needs of home-based workers and home workers. Up next is a report by the World Bank on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that explores the economic and distributional effects of the agreement on the continent. Produced in 2020, the report is designed to guide policymakers as they continue the process of negotiating and implementing the agreement. The report lays out the macroeconomic impacts of the AfCFTA, looking at real income implications, trade implications, output implications, and government revenue implications. It then goes on to examine the distributional effects of the agreement on poverty and employment. For our next recommendation, the Food and Agricultural Organization and the African Union bring us an assessment of gender and agri-food systems in Africa. It starts off with a review of the international and continental policy priorities and commitments regarding gender in the agri-food sector. It then goes on to analyze the situation of women and status of gender mainstreaming in the various agricultural sectors covered by the Malabo Declaration and the CAADP Results Framework, focusing on different goals of the declaration such as agricultural financing, food security, poverty reduction, agribusiness employment and women, and youth empowerment, trade, resilience to climate change, and environmental management. The report also reviews the gender accountability mechanisms and existing institutional gender capacities in relation to gender mainstreaming in the African Union's agricultural policies and investments, as well as the constraints faced by women in achieving gender equality and the factors inhibiting women's empowerment in agriculture. At 204 pages, the report is a long but worthwhile read, providing an in-depth assessment of the status of women's empowerment and gender equality in the African agricultural sector. We switch gears from continental reports to recommend the report on the corruption risk mapping and anti-bribery compliance assessment of Kenya's private sector. The study mapped out the risk of corruption to businesses operating in Kenya using information collected from 1,202 businesses with the purpose of providing useful data to help businesses identify and evaluate their corruption risk. The assessment looked at perception of corruption risk among businesses and found that business subsectors such as professional services, finance and insurance, hospitality, education, health and social work, and arts and entertainment reported a higher level of corruption risk compared to businesses in mining and quarrying, energy, environment, private security, and transport. The survey identified specific kinds of corruption that were prevalent in the areas of human resources, internal audit, procurement and supply, import and export, finance and accounting, sales and marketing, and customer care and service. The consequences of corruption to businesses include business costs and business contract and competition losses, financial losses, business inefficiency, damages to business image, and investors' losses. The report concludes with recommendations to small, medium, and large businesses. Finally, on our list for this fine Tuesday is the second report of the Interagency Task Force on Financing for Development produced last year during the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2021 Financing for Sustainable Development report begins with an assessment of the impact of the pandemic on global macroeconomics, including the interlinkages between economic, social, and environmental risks. It also explores the impact of the global systemic risk on the financing for development agenda, with a view to identify policy options for financing that are sustainable and resilient, and that ensure that sustainability and resilience are financed. The remainder of the report discusses progress in the 7 action areas of the Addis Agenda, which are domestic public resources, domestic and international private business and finance, international development cooperation, international trade as an engine for development, debt and debt sustainability, addressing systemic issues, and science, technology, innovation, and capacity building. Each chapter gives updates on implementation and lays out challenges and policy options at both the national and international levels, including in response to the current crisis and pandemic, as well as climate risks. That's all the 5 reports we are spotlighting this week. Do keep the recommendations coming in. Until next week, stay safe and goodbye, everyone.